Hey, my name is Beau. I'm a musician and music teacher, and in this video, I want to talk about deliberate and naive practice for musicians. So these are really a set of ideas that come from the researcher Anders K. Ericsson. Ericsson was a psychologist, and he researched how do experts acquire their expertise. So this could be musicians, athletes, chess players, like anyone who is really world class at what they do. How are they getting those world class skills? So you probably heard about the 10,000 hour rule, and that was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers. And it's a little bit of a simplistic reduction of Ericsson's research. Gladwell claimed that people that were professionals at what they do often have logged 10,000 hours of practice. And there is some truth in that. Often when you see people who are world-class piano players or athletes, they have put that much time in. But Ericsson's research is really the place to go to clear this up. And so Ericsson has a few concepts that are really worth having in the back of your mind and reviewing mentally once in a while when you're thinking about your own practice sessions and just getting better at an instrument, or getting better at audiating rhythm or harmony or whatever you're working on musically. So we really have three different concepts. We have deliberate practice, purposeful practice, and naive practice. So let's start with naive practice. So naive practice is what musicians do when they sit down to practice and they kind of just play their instrument. And so there is nothing wrong with sitting down at the piano or the guitar or whatever you play, the bagpipes, and just playing and just having fun. But that is different than actually getting better at something. And so in the beginning, let's say I pick up the guitar and it's my first week on the guitar. Everything I do on the guitar is going to be challenging for me because I haven't trained the motor movements. Maybe I'm not that good at audiating things. Maybe every time I learn a new song, I'm encountering some kind of new rhythm that I can't handle. And so everything is new. I'm being challenged by everything that I do. But if you fast forward, a year or two, maybe I know a set of chords, I know some finger picking patterns, I know I can audiate a couple chord progressions, but every time I sit down to play guitar, I'm not getting better. But what I think I'm doing is, I wake up before work and I have a half an hour to practice my guitar, and I just kind of play through the songs that I know, and I'm not growing as a musician. And so that's really what naive practice is. So naive practice is not saying it's bad to just play songs you already know, or it's bad to spend time at the instrument where you're not growing or stretching yourself. What naive practice is when you think you are practicing, you think you are growing, but you're actually just reviewing a bunch of things you can already do. And a lot of people don't have this distinction in mind, and this is not just musically speaking. For example, if you are a music teacher and you've been teaching for several years, it's likely that the first couple years that you were teaching, you were getting better and better. Your communication with your students was getting better. Your organization of maybe keeping track of what you were doing was getting better. All these soft and hard skills are growing because the environment is kind of forcing you to be effective. You're having to be effective. But a lot of people after a certain amount of time in their career, whether you're a teacher, a doctor, or office worker, you kind of plateau after a few years. And that's why in the research, they don't really find that people that have a career for more than 5 years, you're not necessarily getting better after that, because you can kind of hit this plateau and the job doesn't demand that your skill set is raised to just get by, but you're still showing up. And so it's kind of insane to think about, but you could have a job for 20 years and not really get much better. And I've seen that with a lot of guitar players. I know a lot of guitar players who have been playing for 20 or 30 years, but they haven't really learned anything more than what they learned in the first few years. They may know more songs, they may know more repertoire, but they're not learning anything actually new. I mean, maybe they're just learning new repertoire with the same chords that they already know and the same patterns. And so naive practice is really just this, it's kind of this symptom of not understanding that learning new things requires actually challenging yourself. You can't just put time in. And I think that's why Ericsson didn't respond very well to the way Malcolm Gladwell framed the 10,000 hour rule, because it's not just about the amount of time you spend in the practice room. I mean, there's no doubt if you spend 10,000 hours practicing guitar versus someone that spends 100 hours, at some point that dosage is so high, you're probably gonna be better than somebody. But viewing it as a time-based metric, it misses the boat. And so Time is obviously a factor. I mean, when we look at world-class violin players or world-class piano players or whatever it is, the good ones seem to practice a lot. And so time is a factor. It's not meaningless, but it's not the primary metric that you should be viewing the acquisition of expert skill and the acquisition of the expert ability to perform. And so then on the other end of the spectrum, we have deliberate practice. And this is really what Anders Ericsson championed and kind of uncovered through his research and his observations. When someone is learning something, let's say music in this case, but it could be chess, it could be an athletic thing, deliberate practice is when there is an established training regimen in that domain, and you as a student are going to go through incremental series of steps to hone your skills and grow. And so a key component of deliberate practice is that there is an established training protocol in that domain. And so if we take violin performance, I mean, people have been shredding violin for a few hundred years at least, and if you go to a good classical violin teacher, they have a program. And so you can definitely find a music teacher that's not effective that'll give you things to do that are not based off of historical data and kind of empirical things that work. But if you find a good violin teacher or a string teacher or whatever it is, and they have teaching skills to produce students dependably, it's not just like one of their students is skilled, they have a system that produces good violin students if that system is followed, and that system kind of follows rules that the domain at large has learned and picked up on. That's really what deliberate practice is. And so one of the keys, again, is that it's an established training regime that you're going to go through as a student. And then also, a key component is that skills are gained incrementally, and really what practice is, it's the introduction of some kind of new skill, and it's the mastering of the skill. So it's a constant back and forth between, okay, you can do something and you've achieved some kind of stable performance at it. Now you're going to add the next component, and it's going to be a little harder for yourself. You're going to stretch. And the whole point of actually practicing is to develop the ability to do the new skill. In Anders Ericsson's kind of public-facing book, which is called Peak, I believe, he tells a story about this research project that he did, and I'm going to butcher the exact details of this, but you can find this very easily on the internet. But anyways, they had this guy come into the lab, this college student, and they wanted to see if they could train him to recite digits from memory. So Ericsson or a lab assistant would read numbers, I think 1 per second to this guy. So they 1, 7, 9. And the participant's objective was just, okay, after they stopped, how many could he just spit back from memory? And at the time, I think the number was pretty low. It was like somewhere in the 7 to 10 range. And they really thought that this skill was an example of how your short-term memory can only handle so many things. But anyways, this guy went on to be able to do, I think, over 80 or 90 at least numbers, which is kind of insane to think about, that someone could sit there and just read 90 numbers to you, 1 per second, and you'd pause for a second and recite them back. And so they actually helped this guy learn how to do this. And it's really interesting because Ericsson's research, it was both observational in the sense like he was looking at chess players, he was looking at great musicians that were already masters at what they did, and he was just taking a look at what components existed in their practicing that seemed to be universal. So he was taking a look at people in the wild with expert skills and what were they actually doing. But then he was also, with this study that he did, he was trying to do the reverse. He was trying to take someone that did not have expert skills and just apply these principles of deliberate practice and get them to be, world class at the time for what they were doing. Now, this situation where in his lab he was teaching somebody to do this, there wasn't an existing training protocol to do this. And so this is what purposeful practice is. So there's a small distinction in Ericsson's kind of universe between deliberate practice and purposeful practice. So with purposeful practice, it has the spirit of deliberate practice. It has the spirit of trying to stretch your skills and grow and acquire, new little areas of knowledge and content, or just getting faster at things. There's some kind of spirit of improvement or gaining something at your chosen activity. But with purposeful practice, there isn't a historical training regimen to rest on. And so if you want to be a world-class violin player, you're not going to be best served by figuring it out on your own and just putting 10,000 hours in. Go see a teacher who has a track record of producing great violin students. But with this digit span like memorization test, this thing that Ericsson was doing in the lab, there was no one that at the time had a training regimen to do that. And so what Ericsson had to do was devise ways of stretching this guy's skills and getting him to improve his skills. And that's what purposeful practice is. So there is a slight distinction between deliberate and purposeful practice if you get very nitty-gritty. But the whole point of what I'm talking about here is that it's helpful to have this as a mental model when you are practicing. And even just bringing this up once a month and just reflecting on this can make a big difference in your practice sessions. Because if you have goals as a musician to learn repertoire, to improve your skills, you need to be engaged in deliberate or purposeful practice. So, a great example here is if you are studying classical music, likely you're going to be doing deliberate practice because your instrument has probably been studied up the wazoo by other musicians, and hopefully you have a teacher or at least access to like videos on YouTube of people showing you things that you can take ideas from and put into practice. But what if you're practicing something on your instrument? I mean, if you've seen what people are doing now on the guitar with some of these guys on the acoustic guitar like Andy McKee, and they're hitting the guitar percussively, and there isn't really a training protocol, like a teaching protocol for doing that. It's starting to emerge now that that kind of stuff has been more popular for a little while. But more likely than not, what you're going to have to do is figure out how to break things down into component parts and build them up on your own. And so it's purposeful practice. And so I wouldn't really worry too much about the nitty-gritty distinction between the two. But the key is that I would make a distinction in your mind about what you're doing on the instrument. So let's say it's Sunday night, you've had a long week, you're going to sit down with a cup of tea and your beautiful classical guitar, and you don't feel like hammering your brain with something that's very challenging, that's hard to do. Just relax and play your instrument. Just have a good time. Improvise, play through songs connect with the instrument. Do what you got to do to feel good and to feel satisfied. There's nothing wrong with that. That is a wonderful use of your time as a musician. I would venture that's most of the reason why many people even want to play an instrument. So that's a great thing to do. But don't think that that is practice. That is not actually practicing effectively. That is playing your instrument. That is enjoying yourself. And that's, like I said, that's a valuable activity for you as a musician. But when it's time to practice, think about what you're trying to do. Make a rough plan, whether you write it down in a practice journal or not. But think about what you're trying to do and break things down into component parts that are actually masterable. So I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about when you're practicing, you should be working so hard, there's sweat coming down your face and you can't stand it, it's so difficult. It's not about making things unnecessarily hard. In fact, it's the opposite of that. It's about breaking things down into reachable component kind of stretches and then going through it and slowly kind of cranking up the difficulty level. You do want a nice on-ramp. Practicing should not be like running into a concrete wall that you keep beating your head against. That's not very motivating and it's not very effective. Practicing should be an incremental growth, minute by minute, 10 minute by 10 minute. You should be learning something new. If you're kind of just repeating things over and over again, that's kind of more like naive practice. This idea that you can just repeat the same thing over and over again and it will give you some kind of magical benefit. That is not a very useful thing to think about. Now, if you're attempting to repeat something over and over again to get faster at it, and you can't play it faster, that's fine. That would count as purposeful or deliberate practice. You're attempting to stretch your skills. So anyways, have that in your mind. Once in a while, check in on this. In my practice sessions, am I actually engaged in purposeful / deliberate practice, or am I just playing through things? And if you're playing through things and you're enjoying yourself, then that's fine. But don't think that that is an effective way to master new skills on the instrument or learn new things, because it can actually be very demotivating for people if you feel like you're putting in hours and hours a week and you're replaying things and you think that that's practice and you fast forward 6 months and you're like, I haven't really gotten any better. That can be super disheartening. And so just by making a little bit of a change in the thinking process and engaging in some reflection, once a month or once every few months about how you're practicing and thinking like, do I have to switch something up here? You can benefit from it a lot. Anyways, my name is Beau. I'm a music teacher and musician. I offer online piano and guitar lessons. I also offer coaching for musicians and music teachers. So if you need to get your practicing routine act together, or if you have musical projects that you're struggling to finish but that are important to you, I offer coaching to help you plan and follow through on all that kind of stuff. So if that's something you're interested in, shoot me an email, leave me a comment. Have a wonderful day.